Okay, students, I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. This is a modification of the try-catch finally, which also has the file handling here at the very end. There's not a lot to do with the file handling. Just open the file either in a brand new format or in an append format, simply to write messages to the file. Now, I have changed the validation slightly up here. I've made the text that is going out into constant strings so that they can be just called by that name and not have to keep typing letters. And then this is the same. I've documented this over here. I have a try-catch here now that we had last time, and the only difference is that I've modified it by saying MSG sender, and I send in one of the messages, in this case letter error message, which is this up here, and it sends it to there, and then when it goes down here it's checking to see whether we need to make a new file or whether there's an existing one to use. Either way, it writes out the right line MSG here. MSG is passed into, if you remember from up here where it says MSG sender, I passed in letter error MSG, which is to say it's passing in this variable that has this message into it. And then it comes into here, and then it writes that message out to the log file. When I have a file that already exists, it simply appends that to the end of the log file. When the log file is done, we close. Now I do want to point out here, I have a try-catch here, and it isn't required. I create it because there are instances where you're creating a file or appending to a file where you might have literally made the file just big enough to fill up the space of a hard disk, and then there will be a crash as a result of that. This try-catch will catch some kind of problem with the writing of the file. If the disk is read-only, if it's been removed, that can be happening when you have a USB drive, or if there isn't space on the drive, anything which might cause some particular problem with the actual physically writing of the file, it will go to the catch and write out this message to the screen so the user can tell that and not rely on the data having been written out. Okay, so all of this up here is pretty much the same. I have I have the try-catch, and it writes out the error message if there's something wrong with the user input, but the rest of it is that it sends the information to the error, to the file. Okay, so if it's an error, then it sends that message to the file. If it's a valid item, then it sends a message that it's validated to the file. Either way, it will be the same. So if I run this, and I put in a few letters, I click this, nothing happens apparently because of the fact that there's no error. If I put in a number and I click this, I get the exception that's thrown, and the message, only letters that are allowed in the field. Again, that's that constant that is right here. Only letters are allowed in the field. You see that right here at the very end of that. Okay, and then we can do this, and it takes that out, and that's the end of that, so we can close it. Now I want to show you in the project file, let's see here, I think this is the new one, yeah, ErrorLog, that if you go in here and you go to bin debug, that's where the log file will be created. Don't change the path of it. Don't try to move the location of this. This is the default location. And if you were to send yours to me, I wouldn't be able to read it unless it was in the default location, because trying to set it to a different location is what we call an absolute path override. And an absolute path, your absolute path will never be the same as my absolute path. So with this is what we call a relative position, and it's relative to the exe file, which is the program. And you can see here, new log file established. This field is validated. That was when I clicked on the thing with just letters. And then when I clicked on it by adding a number, you see the error message here. Only letters are allowed in the field. Now you can make this a little bit fancier, and you can add a time date stamp, to the thing. But other than that, this is what it is. And we can go back, and you can see if I rerun it, and if I can put just numbers in here, and you can see it'll just take a digit off the end. If we keep validating, it'll keep taking them off of the end, and it'll keep writing error message to the data file. And then by the time I put in letters into here and I validate again, you'll see that that's that. But if we go back to the data file, the log file, you can see how many things that have been added to the log file. Okay, so it doesn't really have to be more complicated than that. I have made it maybe a little bit more complicated, so I added a lot of comments here. Okay, so one thing you do have to do when you're dealing with the log file, you have to add system.io up here. Okay, so using system.io, because it has to have that information to handle files. In this case, stream writers. Okay, so be aware of that. I could also, in theory, I could comment this out, and I could do msg underscore sender and send the one thing move. I'll just type it. More trouble than it's worth. ex dot toString, and I could actually send the exception message to the file. So let's do this, and I can do a few letters, put a digit on the end. Nothing apparently shows here, and we really should have some kind of user error message here, but it's an interesting thing because we can show the data file, and we can see system argument exception, only letters are allowed in the field at try-catch form, and you can see that that information got written to the data file. Okay. If you have more questions, that's fine, but I'm trying to keep this fairly short. Let me just put this up again. And this is the top half of this, which shows you. Okay, let's do this. This is everything. I mean, there's a few usings before this, but they'll be there anyway. You need to add this one. And then this is the part that was basically the try-catch finally for the last task. Okay, and you can pause YouTube to see what this says in more detail. And then the file handling portion is down here. There we go. And it looks like this. And again, I put in this try catch merely to catch potential things that we weren't really testing for. It doesn't do anything about the create a new file or append a file. That is just something that we're going to do naturally. And again, I close the file. It's a good idea because basically when we're doing this, it opens a file. Technically speaking, it doesn't need the log close because when this all ends, it closes the file anyway. But I prefer to have log close to clearly demark where the end of this block is. Okay, so this should be fairly straightforward. If you have more questions, ask and responses will be given. Have a good evening.